learn from me, the mistake maker. So today I got a special video. I want to go over my top 10 mistakes that winemakers make when making wine. You don't want to miss this video. Make sure you're clicking that like and subscribe button, and let's get right into the top 10 mistakes winemakers make. And I've made them all.
We've had up and we've had down. We've had warm nights, we've gone round and round. What I know, this much is true.
All right, first I wasn't going to put these in any particular order, but I think it's important because some stand out as number 1 and number 2. But let's start at the bottom with the top 10 mistakes. All right, at number 10, I don't know if this is a tip or a mistake, but it's happened to me. When you're using wine bottles, or specifically recycling wine bottles, some of the wine bottles that manufacturers are putting out there are just garbage. I've had some break on me because the glass is just so thin. So make sure you're using good wine bottles because they'll last a little bit longer. I had a mishap when I was putting one down and I just barely touched it and the thing shattered. I couldn't find the video. I had it on video. I wanted to show you, but that's number 10. Don't use cheap wine bottles. Get the right winemaking equipment. I've got links to a lot of the stuff you see in my videos down below. All right, number 9. You gotta have the right winemaking equipment. You wanna have the right carboys because you wanna make sure you're filling those levels up, and you gotta have the right recipe, which I show you in many of my videos. But equipment is a necessity. You wanna make sure you got the right additives to be successful, and you wanna make sure that you have all the right equipment, such as racking canes. You've gotta have a racking cane that gets down, and you just don't wanna use hoses to siphon. You're just gonna have a disaster. So equipment is a necessity. Make sure you're watching that equipment video that I got, and I'll put a link in the description. Number 8 on the list. Too many rackings. You can actually rack your wine way too many times. It's not necessary. If you look after you're putting the primary and you're putting it in that secondary and it sits in there for 30 days and it's starting to clear out, you're probably ready to add the filtering agent that you want to use. You know I love to use bentonite. But I've racked, after I put that bentonite in, my next racking was the bottling stage. Now there's some wines that you gotta do additional racking, such as like a pulpy wine, like a mango or a peach wine. Those will require extra rackings, but you don't need 5 and 6 rackings. You just don't have to do it. When you start to see it clear and you're not seeing fine particles, stop. Get it bottled. That's what you want to get to anyways. All right, another problem that winemakers have, and I've had so many people contact me about this, it's headspace in the carboy. You can see some of these videos I'll put in here, but you want to get it up as close to that bunge or the airlock as possible. You don't want to get too close that wine will go up into your airlock. I've had that happen a couple times. That's another mistake I should have added to this list. But you want to eliminate headspace when you get to that secondary stage and you do your rackings, because oxygen at that point becomes your enemy. So when you're getting it into your carboys, make sure you're eliminating headspace in there, because that's just going to give you a better wine. You don't want to get it oxidated. So that was tip number 7. Tip number 6. When you get to the bottling stage, you know how I like to back sweeten my wine. I like a sweeter wine. I'm not a dry wine person, but I know a lot of yous are. But when you back sweeten, if you back sweeten, you gotta stabilize your wine so the yeast doesn't kick back up and start fermenting again, because you will have a disaster if you're not stabilizing your wine and corks start to blow wherever you're keeping your wine. You just want to make sure you're using potassium sorbate to stabilize that wine because you don't want to mess on your hands. That's number 6. Meditate. Meditation is great for winemaking. Number 5, don't rush winemaking. Relax. Get your Zen face on. You don't want to rush winemaking because you will cause all kinds of problems. When I say ferment your must 7 to 14 days, don't rack it in 2 to 3 days. It's not done. Again, if it goes to the 14 days, that's not a big issue. I always say let it go 30 to 45 days. Don't do it in 15 days and rack it because you're just going to keep introducing oxygen. You don't want to do that. Again, winemaking is supposed to be enjoyable. It's an enjoyable hobby. You just got to let it work out itself and take your time. Don't rush it. Just make sure you're taking your time. Don't rush this hobby. It's supposed to be fun, right? Make sure you're pitching that yeast at the right time. If you're making wine from fruit, you got to make sure you're killing all that wild yeast in your fruit, which is what the CAMPDEN tablets are going to do. But after you let it sit for 24 hours, then you put your yeast in. And this is, again, only applies if you're using fruit to make wine, fresh fruit. So make sure that you're not putting that yeast in until 24 hours later, until the CAMPDEN tablets did their job. So again, wait the 24 hours before pitching that yeast. And you also have watched me do that yeast. You don't need to mix this in water. You just pour it right in. You can see it works every time for me. I've never not had it work by just putting the yeast directly in the must. All right, if you're making wine from fruit, this is a great tip. You have to make sure you're sanitizing your fruit. And the best way to do that is to use CAMPDEN tablets. The CAMPDEN tablets are going to kill that wild yeast that you got floating in there, which can create all kinds of bacteria issues and problems. So make sure you're using CAMPDEN tablets because they are helping to sanitize your fruit. And then before bottling, you want to use CAMPDEN tablets again, because just in case through the process you had some issues, putting those CAMPDEN tablets in before bottling will help sanitize and get rid of that bad bacteria that you're about to put in your bottles of your wine. So CAMPDEN tablets are a must in my opinion. All right, number 2 on the list, I have a whole dedicated video on oxygen. Make sure you're watching that. Again, linked in the description. But oxygen in the primary stage is critical because your yeast needs to bloom. The more oxygen you have in at least the first 5 days in your primary fermentation, the better your yeast will do. You want it to take off. You want to see all kinds of foaming and bubbling in there. It's a necessity, oxygen in the primary stage. So many people have let me know that their fermentation stopped. Well, maybe your yeast isn't getting enough oxygen. So you'll see where I stir that must every day for at least the first 5 days. At the 5-day level, you can probably stop stirring it, but I stir it the whole way through fermentation, 7 to 10 days normally. It's not going to hurt. Oxygen is, again, your enemy in the secondary stage. So make sure you're feeding your yeast the oxygen that it needs in that primary stage. That's number 2. All right, this one deserves a drum roll. Number 1, you gotta make sure you're sanitizing your equipment. 90% of all problems in winemaking is caused by some kind of a sanitation issue. Make sure you're not missing this step. Star San, you know I've used it. You've seen me use it. I've got videos on how to use it. But make sure you're sanitizing your equipment. I can't stress that enough. It's going to help with bacteria control. Just keep everything in line. When you open that bottle, you want to know it's going to be fit to drink and that it's sanitized or sterilized. Star San sanitizer, it's got to be number one. Sanitizing all your equipment is a must. Make sure you're doing it. Do not skip this. It's my number one mistake that winemakers make. So there it is. That's my top 10 winemaking mistakes. I hope you enjoyed some of this content. Make sure you're watching all my videos. I got a great one coming up. I can't wait to show you here, probably in a couple weeks, but it's going to be one of my favorite wines, and I promise you're going to want to try it. So again, I hope you learned something. Make sure you're clicking that like and subscribe button, and until next time, don't make these mistakes.
What I know, this much is true. There ain't a tree with any leaf that roots me like